Hi, my name is Junko Yoshida. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Ojo-Yoshida Report. This is what we call Tech Vision because we would like to have people who are actually hold important positions in the industry and have them share their vision of where we're going, especially in the electronics industry. And today we have very special guests. We have two senior relationship directors from the U.S. Department of Commerce. First, I'd like to introduce Mike O'Brien. Hi, Mike. Great. And we also have Lynelle McKay. She is also the Senior Relationship Director at the Department of Commerce. Hi, Lynelle.
Hello. Hi, Junko. Hi, Bola.
Hello.
Nice
Well,
to meet
thanks for coming to the show and spending time with us. We were talking about this before the recording starts. I have been going back and forth with Mike for several months trying to get him on the show, and he has been busy. He actually strengthened my skepticism. Maybe the Department of Commerce is really shrouded in the mystery. They don't want to talk to us. But anyway, I'm really glad this is happening. And the reason why I think Bolaji can explain to you is that we would like to put the face to the program that U.S. government has launched. It's not just on paper. It's not just on press release. It's not just on what politicians tell us. There are actually people behind the curtain who have been driving this CHIPS Act on the ground level. So let's start from there. Bolaji, would you like to ask the first question?
Thank you, Junko, Lynelle, and Mike. It's really a pleasure having you. I think one of the first things that I realized is that, from the discussions that have taken place so far, the extent of the experience that your team has in the semiconductor industry itself. You're not political folks who just were brought on board. So that's the first thing that I would like us to talk about. Describe your team, maybe even talk a little bit about your own background and give us some insight into who are you and who are the folks on your team.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So sort of the question is, did anybody at the Department of Commerce know anything about semiconductors? That's sort of the question, Bola? Okay, all right. So actually, there are several bureaus in Commerce that know a lot about semiconductors. So NIST, right, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they've conducted research on semiconductors since the 40s, right? And they continue to work with the semiconductor industry and academia on cutting-edge research, designing, and even manufacturing chips. They actually have 2 nano fabrication facilities in their, under them. And the NBS Semiconductor Technology Program was established in 1968, I think, to improve device yields, reliability, lower costs, improve fabrication performance. So they're since really a long time, they've sort of been in the in the semiconductor space. And they've also got these manufacturing institutes. They're called USA Manufacturing Institutes. One's for integrated photonics, and others for robotics, and others for smart manufacturing. And all of those directly or indirectly, right, support the semiconductor industry. And under the CHIPS R&D program, there's actually a digital twin manufacturing institute that's going to be stood up. And they also got these institutes for GaN, for advanced power, and for silicon carbide. So and they just got a host of really deep technology experts in metrology, in lithography, compound semiconductors, and a number of them have sort of been detailed over to help with the CHIPS program. And then, also under the department is the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, which advances U.S. national security, foreign policy, and economic objectives by ensuring, we have effective export controls, treaty compliance, and they're, have a fair amount of expertise resident in there. And the EDA, Economic Development Agency, which is another thing that sits under Commerce. There's like a whole bunch of things under Commerce. People, really don't even appreciate it. I didn't either. But one of them is this EDA, and they've actually been administering $500 million worth of programs for these things called tech hubs around the country.
Mike, it's kind of interesting that when we discuss, how the CHIPS Act is being implemented, one of the questions that comes to mind is, who are these people? Where did they come from? What's their background? I mean, you can even use yourself, Mike, as an example, or Lynelle can use herself as an example. Who are the people working on the CHIPS Act, in addition to the folks that you have already at the Department of Commerce who may have been detailed in and brought in to help champion this?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it really is a combination of industry people, semiconductor, finance, academia, and then government, right? So, and I think the secretary, early on after the act got passed, really said, we haven't done industrial kind of policy and work like this since the space program. And if you recall, that was really a whole of country effort with industry, with government at all levels, and with academia. And that's what we need to do here. So she's really helped build a team that's got folks from the semiconductor industry, folks like Lynelle from NXP, myself, Synopsys, Cadence. We've got folks that were at SK Hynix, Meta, Facebook, Intel, Global Foundries. So and a lot of these folks that come out of retirement or just looking to do something different, or have been looking to how can I serve my country, and this would be an interesting way. And this is kind of a once in a generation opportunity to do something really meaningful. So a lot of people who really do believe in the mission. So we've got folks from industry, and then on finance, the head of the investment office, Todd Fisher, he's a 25 years KKR executive. We've got folks that were investment banking partners from Goldman Sachs, came out of retirement, folks that know the semiconductor industry, the technology industry. One of them goes back to actually setting up Goldman's first Silicon Valley office, right? And again, folks from banking that can really help us digest all this financial information in the applications, and make sure we know what do we have to do to get them to build here, right? What's the cost difference really with Asia, so we make the taxpayer dollars go as far as we can, and make our money go as far as it can. And then we've got folks that's sort of on the government side that are workforce development experts that know how to work with universities, community colleges, training. We've got a whole team that's focused on environmental permitting and NEPA, lawyers that come, with a lot of experience, because these are big construction projects. We haven't done a lot of this type of big scale manufacturing in a while. And there are a lot of, things to, jump through and permitting and so forth. And, we want to take care of the environment. That's obviously very important, but, whatever we can do to be coordinated and streamline things and make it go fast is what we want to try to do. So yeah, this program, Bola and Junko, is like when I joined in February of 23. There were like 5 of us in the investment office, and about the same number in some of the other sort of groups. Now we're sort of a team of about 140, really, kind of cranking through all these, applications, getting agreements put in place, and again, trying to make this happen as quickly as we can.
Let me just quickly follow up with Lynelle on that topic. What's the synergy like? I mean, you have people from all of these varied backgrounds, and you have to kind of find a way to work together. So tell us about that background of working together when you see the people that have come together in the team.
Given the fact that we're not from government, so this is a first experience for many of us. Practically almost the majority of the investment team obviously is not coming from government. That has been the most impressive part of the CHIPS program office, is assembling this group of people that otherwise never would have worked together. And I think all of us today would say that that's probably the highlight of the time that we've had together as a team, that we were able to put together this expertise, from Goldman Sachs partners to, leaders from the EDA world to advanced packaging to academia. It is just really amazing. And that's really what I think is the cornerstone of this team that has come assembled here today. It truly is like a startup in the Department of Commerce.
Lynelle, if I remember correctly, you told me before this broadcast recording started, you said you got actually recruited by Goldman?
Well, it was someone that was in the Goldman area because we have two retired Goldman Sachs partners that have experience specifically in banking for semiconductors. And I had just met the current person there that was working at Goldman and had known me because I was retired and ex semiconductor executive and just networking. And she called and said, "Hey, you have both semiconductor executive leadership background, plus I've served in the role in leadership roles in the Girl Scout nonprofit space." And they said, "Hey, that's a really interesting background," right? And as Mike pointed out, this is a once in a generation opportunity for us to make a difference. And what better way to take our semiconductor business background, technology background, and marry that up with the ability to serve our country in this, once in a lifetime industrial policy effort with the CHIPS program.
It's interesting. If you're coming from the outside, you're a semiconductor executive and you're making a pitch, and you've got to cover all the bases. I mean, Mike even talked about environmental impact. If you're from Intel, as an example, and you're greenfielding in Ohio, and then you come into the team, I think it must be some level of relief to actually find that you're sitting across the table from folks who really, really get all of these various elements of it. I'm not sure if there's a response to that, but I was just thinking in my head that if I come in with a proposal, and you can actually tell me all of those different things that I must take care of, and I know on the other side of the table there are folks with those experience, that must have been really neat.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think the companies have appreciated that. Although it does mean that, we've had tough negotiations because, again, we do know about the industry, and we've got the backbone of the group is really like folks in their late 20s, early 30s that are just amazing. They're coming out of the best schools, and they just crank through these financial models and kind of arm us with the information we need to figure out what's the right, what's a good match for the company and for the country and the government. So sometimes we do hear they're happy we're on the job as a taxpayer because we're getting as much as for our dollars as we can, but they're not happy with ultimately how much money they're getting, right? So, but it's been again, it is a real partnership too, right? Because again, we haven't done projects like this at a scale, for decades. So I'm way less jaded about government than I was before I started this job, because I see at the states and cities, they could be Republican, they could be Democrat, they are working hand in glove to make these projects happen, to remove obstacles, and even people leaving their staffs and going back and forth. It's been really it's been heartening.
Both of you mentioned that this is like once in a generation type of project, right? And I would like you to step back a little bit, sort of tell us about the motivation, basic pillars of CHIPS Act that have motivated you to join, but also got the industry excited.
So how did this all start? In other words, Junko? Yeah. Well, really, over the last 3 decades, while the U.S. maintained leadership in design, in EDA, we outsourced most of the manufacturing to East Asia. A lot of the European semiconductor companies did the same. It became cheaper to build there, lots of times because of special tax breaks and grants. It's been well documented, right, that the amount of manufacturing, like in 1990, for semiconductors used to be, close to 40%, and today it's more like 12%, and in the very leading edge, it's 0, right? Because it's either in Taiwan or South Korea. So, and then I think that the pandemic was really a wake-up call, right? And in 2020, I use this story. My mother, between watching 60 Minutes and between not getting a part fixed on her car, because there weren't semiconductors available, she started asking me about the semiconductor supply chain. She's 88 years old, and I'm like, just really, this is it kind of blew my mind. So I knew this was a really big thing when that happened, right? So chips are indispensable. They're in our cars, phones, computers, defense systems. They, literally keep the lights on. So we lost tons of money in the auto industry, right, because they couldn't get the chips that they needed. And pacemakers, right? There are backlogs on pacemakers because there was a shortage of devices. So it became really clear this stuff's really important. And then the other thing that became really clear is we were way too reliant, on other regions, particularly, East Asia for the supply of these chips. We had no resilience against disruptions, right, such as pandemics, natural disasters, or other sorts of things. So, I think it just really became obvious that we had to do something to marshal more investment here and more manufacturing. And, both sides of the aisle, right, the bipartisan sort of effort got together to finally respond.
Lynelle, with the space program, we wanted to go out there, but we also wanted to beat somebody. We also wanted to beat Russia and make sure that we got it right. I mean, the various reasons behind the CHIPS Act, there's quite a lot more than that in this case, as Mike was explaining. Can you kind of just help us understand in terms of, so there's a competitive position, there's a supply chain security position, there's a defense military security position, there's an economic security position. These are very critical pillars of the economy. How did you guys resolve some of these in your deliberations?
Well, we actually take all of those into consideration when we are analyzing the merits of each individual application. And so those are exactly what we do the assessment against. And it's really a commercial diligence process, and why we have the ability to have such a talented team of investment professionals side by side with semiconductor as well as government and policy experts. And so we look at each individual application on its own individual merits. Like I mentioned, the number one program priority for CHIPS for America is that economic and national security, bar none. But we also look at other significant or feasibility of commercial, financial, and technical feasibility. We look at their ability to have the workforce needed so that when we invest and we build these new greenfield, brownfield modernization projects, that these fabs or facilities are going to be able to be constructed, one, but also filled with the talent pipeline that we need to run these facilities and fabs. And then finally, we also assess them on what we call broader impacts, which is everything from the company's ability to invest in R&D in the US, as well as things like their community impact that they have at their local and state level in their ecosystems. And so we broadly look at that full scope of how they fit our program priorities. And then, we also look at the portfolio impact too. So we look at them individually as a company, but also what is that portfolio that is needed in order to create more resilience in not only the US market, but also in the global semiconductor supply chain. And so we look at it from all different angles. As Mike mentioned, there's a lot of data that we are collecting and a lot of data that we're assessing. But I think at the end of the day, we need to be able to solve for all of those when we make these CHIPS incentive awards.
Yeah, it's not just enough to have the leading edge here, logic and memory. We need current and mature legacy chips. We need advanced packaging. We need, like Global Wafers today. I don't know if you saw, but we announced, one of the top three, wafer manufacturers. They're making huge investments in the United States. So you need the entire supply chain.
Yeah, they're big funding levels. The big companies, they're small companies, and the supply chain relies on these supply chain companies to wrap around these leading edge companies or current mature IDMs or foundries.
So this is just a hypothetical question. If all these things you just talked about, this is really now I'm beginning to appreciate the depth of the program, because if the purpose of the industry, whether it's in this case semiconductor industry, is to not only advance the technology, or the companies, semiconductor companies, can profit for themselves, there's a broader societal impact that if those are left to each private company, probably company would have kept invested not necessarily in the United States, but elsewhere where things are, cost of maybe cheaper, or that they wouldn't have that long-term view. What you're bringing in, which you can actually proudly tell the public that this is a project parallel to the Apollo project space program, is because sort of you're looking after not just each company's profit, but you're actually looking after the entire society, how they can actually benefit from this, right?
Exactly. And it's about sustainability. It's not short term investments and build something and move on. It's really about making sure that we look at it holistically so that we're solving for the root cause problems to ensure that when we make these investments, we are catalyzing private investments too, which is a very important part of this because 39 billions on the commercial manufacturing incentive side just doesn't go that far in the semiconductor industry, and we know that. But we need to ensure that we are creating sustainable semiconductor clusters that are going to be able to provide in these local communities, provide for good paying jobs, but also to really rebuild the semiconductor manufacturing here in the United States. And then with that comes the R&D front end of that, because we know that while we do have a leadership position today, as well as in the past, we continue to have that leadership position in the R&D and design side of the semiconductor industry. We need to keep that flywheel going. And so the investments that the Chips for America on the R&D side are absolutely critical and linked together with the commercial incentives that we're doing in chips.
I know that the R&D part is an important part of our discussion. Before we dive deeper into it, I just want to kind of create another hypothetical situation. When a company comes in and makes a grant request, and like you said, $39 billion, if it's a fab that company wants to create or build, that money is not going to completely cover the cost. So if a company is coming in and thinking, well, we actually need $20 billion, and you can't give them $20 billion, how do you look at and how do you help them also generate and create the additional funding that they're going to need so that you're not going to go in and get a grant of, I don't know, $1 billion for a project that's going to cost $12 billion. And then, a few years down the line, your greenfield is only that, exactly, just a greenfield. What's that process like?
We look at that commercial viability for them as a standalone project. We look at the financial viability of them as a company, perhaps their parent company as well. And we combined all of that with the technical feasibility of their ability to construct, expand, or modernize these fabs or facilities. So we look at that holistically. We also believe that it is in the notice of funding opportunity, a funding incentive guideline of 5 to 15%. So it's not going to be 100% funded by the U.S. government, by the Department of Commerce, but rather they need to go get state and local incentives. So there's buy-in at the local level, so that we know that it's going to be invested in a state local government that wants that those companies to be there for the long term. And then we also have the ability, or the companies have the ability, to utilize the Treasury's investment tax credit, which is a good percentage that could help offset some.
25%.
Yeah. That's big.
25%.
Yeah.
That's a huge incentive.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So we think of it holistically, combining the CHIPS incentives, the loan guarantee. We have the authority to go up to 75 billion in loans or loan guarantees, in addition to the 39 billion of direct funding incentives, plus the Treasury's investment tax credit, plus the state and local. So we're looking at them coming to the table to be able to show that it is financially sustainable.
Wow, it seems to me that we may be talking about $52 billion CHIPS Act, but in terms of its actual potentials to these companies and what you guys are able to do, if you combine the loan guarantees, the tax credits and all of that, we're looking at well over $100 billion.
Absolutely. The 39 billion so far, if you look back a couple years from when CHIPS Act was talked about and then put into law, it's already catalyzed 300 almost to 400 billion dollars of private investment. So we are counting on that to drive this ecosystem view of how we can stand this up and how it can be sustainable for the US.
Yeah, and the ITC also plays a role in that sustainability, right? Because these are, 5-year
IDC is what?
the investment
Oh,
tax
okay.
credit, 25%. So companies either get a tax deduction or actually a cash payment. But if there's continuous construction, because these projects do take 5 years, 10 years. So if they started after the CHIPS Act was signed and they start before the end of 2026 and they go on for many years, as long as there's continuous construction, they can continue to get that tax credit. So that's a very powerful, powerful long-term type of incentive.
It seems like you guys have a very sophisticated process so that it's not like here's the money, you use it whatever you want, right? You seem to have a milestone set up, and that's not the general milestone, but I think you build milestone for each company. Can you tell us that process?
Yeah, each application goes through a merit review. It goes to a preliminary term sheet, the ones that you've seen announced that we've done so far, and then it goes to award documents. And each one of those projects are very unique. As I mentioned, assessed upon its ability to deliver on the program priorities for the CHIPS Act. And those milestones are then set specifically for each project. So they aren't just a cookie cutter set of milestones. It is specifically set in order to be able to measure, distribute funds, but also measure the progress so that we can ensure that the companies are delivering on what the promises were, and those are directly tied to how they fulfill the program priorities of the CHIPS Acts. Again, economic national security being, the most important, but there are also milestones that could be set to examples in workforce development commitments and such.
So, if that is the case, we are a member of the media, and we have a very short-sighted, superficial understanding of everything's going on in the world. I have to admit. So,
In the semiconductor space, you're not superficial, Junko.
I think when people often talk about how do you measure the success of the program, they would like to paint the picture, broad brush stroke, that okay, Intel is doing this and Global Foundry is doing this, and how many chips they're making. That's a kind of a lump sum that how much chips are we making already in the United States. That kind of argument, right? But in fact, it's a lot more nuanced. So tell us your measure of success. How do you address that yourself?
In the early part of 2023, we came out with the CHIPS Program Office Vision for Success. And so we laid out what those outcomes would look like and what success looks like. And it means that by the end of the decade, we would be having at least 2 clusters for leading edge logic. We would have leading edge memory here in the United States. We would have a number of advanced packaging facilities, again, because we realize as Moore's law slows down that innovation is not going to just be mainly at the chip level, but rather in the heterogeneous integration of chiplets and such. And so that investment is really important and one of the pillars of our program priorities. And then that we would have the supply chain necessary so that we have sustainable ecosystems and semiconductor clusters. So if I think about at the end of the decade and we look back, were we successful? We would be looking towards did we create and support a sustainable ecosystem that delivered on that vision for success? One of the things the Secretary Raimondo likes to talk about is today, there's 0 leading edge logic happening here in the U.S. By the end of the decade, we hope that can be closer to 20% of that. So again, it's not one country, not the U.S. doing everything on its own, but rather if we are going to have true supply resilience, this is a global semiconductor industry. And so we know that if we partner with our allies, which we are doing, that we can ensure that we'll have global resiliency. And then that means we'll have global economic and national security. So there's lots of measures for success. I didn't mention, but in my new role as Chief Portfolio Management Officer for CHIPS, that's exactly what we're looking forward to is what does this look like post-award? And it's about that portfolio management so we can ensure that the investments that we're making and that we're all clearly working on right now are going to be able to be, as a partner, working together with the companies as we move forward to ensure that we are investing and seeing the outcomes that we had initially set with our vision for success.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think the other piece of this too is just the jobs impact, right? I mean, in certain areas, like you look upstate New York, Syracuse, it's just beaten down, right? So many big companies, Kodak, right? I mean, they left the area, Carrier, they left the area, and at that announcement, it was really clear if you're taking an Uber, back and forth to things, like every driver, like, are they taking job applications yet? Maybe one of my kids will work there one day. I mean, these programs can have a transformative impact on a number of, regions around the country. So there's also this, huge jobs impact, right? Tens of thousands of, direct jobs, and then all the, 100,000 plus of indirect jobs. So I think that's something, again, we really want to see tangible progress, by 2030 and beyond.
What part of these programs, all of those elements that you've talked about, what about them makes it very likely that the elements will survive another administration, that it will continue, it's not going to be curtailed by a new administration, for example?
The very beginning of this was bipartisan, right? I mean, I think when the sort of tail end of the Obama administration, there were people that really sort of understood that. The next administration, same thing, and dialogue started with Taiwan and TSMC under that administration, and then both parties really came together under the Biden administration to work this act. I mean, the Senate passed it in June of 21, I think. The House, August of 22. But it really was folks from both sides of the aisle working really, really hard. Kind of like, we wish they would do more often, right? But really worked hard to sort of make that happen. And it's there's fabs going in every state, blue, red, purple, right? So and the whole CHIPS office is not political, right? We're civil servants, right? I think we're very optimistic, right, that all of this sort of momentum and work is going to continue.
Let me reframe my question. In a sense, let me reframe my question, Mike. What I meant is that so there's a political part, and the CHIPS Act was passed as a bipartisan effort. But in terms of the elements of the CHIPS Act itself, there are certain things that even Lynelle was talking about that makes me feel like, okay, this is likely to continue. The impact is going to continue to flow through. If you take the investment tax credit as an example, there are certain factors that makes it like, okay, this thing is not just going to get curtailed because the funding has expired.
No, I agree. I think the ITC is a powerful motivation into the future.
But also, I mean, are you guys trying to spend as much money possible before the end of this current administration, or how does that work? Because some of the monies are not, you're not spending all the money right now. I mean, it's like it's a long-term process. So that how do you safeguard some of the monies reserved for the later use? How are you conserving that?
Well, if you look at some of the projects that have already been announced, these are multi-project awards. And so we see that as not just one individual fab, let's say for Intel, but rather multiple facilities that can last all the way construction through, let's just say, the end of the decade, 2030. So we see that as allocated funds through their now proposed PMTs that will eventually go to firm award documents. But we see that investment lasting out through the next few years into probably the end of 20 to
Right.
2030.
So those are protected. That's what you're saying. Those are at the point where you awarded the contract.
Then there's the firm agreement between the company and the government.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And we want to get those done as quickly as we can for lots of reasons. But the top one is, we want the fabs built here as soon as we can, right? We want the capacity here as soon as we can. So that's really, that's the primary driver. And and same thing with the R&D, and the R&D is a little bit behind the manufacturing incentives, but you're already seeing a lot of kind of announcements, already this year. There'll be more, and into early 25.
I want to also make a point too that it's not just this rush to spend the money. It's really about doing the right analysis and the commercial due diligence. These are 15, 20, $25 billion facilities that take time to do right. Right. And so for us, it's not speed. It's really about, can we do the right thing so that it's truly this investment that is going to be sustainable in the US semiconductor industry. So I think it's less about that speed. Obviously, people want us to move quickly, but we want to be able to make educated, right decisions because we want to maximize the impact of our US taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, that's an important point because Lynelle, you yourself said that you'll be responsible for the portfolio management, right? That means that there's an aftercare that your government actually decided to work with certain companies, but you're not saying just goodbye. You got the money, you do whatever you want. No, we're going to watch you. We're going to work with you, and we're going to help you if that portfolio needs to be managed. Is that it?
Exactly. We're going to be partners with our awardees and help them throughout the process because as we know from semiconductors, things change. We know that for sure, right? And this is the most cyclical industry, I guess one can imagine. And so we know what to expect, and we know that there's going to need to be flexibility and that partnership. So if they have any issues as they work together with us, whether it be anything from workforce and childcare to permitting, environmental, all the way to construction and high volume manufacturing, we have the expertise and we want to be their partner.
You've made large announcements, large grants, and you've had people come in and say, "Hooray! Yeah, we got it." And you've probably seen some people walk away disappointed. I'm kind of interested in what's been the response from the industry. When you make announcements, when you go through all of this, how are they treating this?
I should ask you guys that question because you can tell us how they're responding. It may be different than what they tell us. I think first and foremost, and I'll hand over to Mike too, but I think one, the caliber of the team that we've assembled and the detailed process that we take, I think they realize that they are dealing with people that really understand semiconductors for one. Obviously, it is a complex process, so sometimes they would prefer it to be less complex, but I think they understand and appreciate what we have set up here. And so it's really been very positive feedback overall from the industry. But now we have to execute. So that's the hard part. But I'll pass it over to Mike. He might have.
No, I've had one customer in particular tell me like we're happy you're on the job as a taxpayer. We're happy you're on the job, right? And that ability to really understand the business and get to something, because every business is a little bit different. So to come up with a bespoke agreement that sort of works for them and works for us, it's not easy. So I think there's an appreciation, but I'm sure there's a frustration. And again, government, we're developing new muscles, right? That have sort of atrophied over decades, right? So, there's some pain involved, I guess. It's work, right? But I think overall, I think the results are going to speak for themselves, right? And it's all a process of get preliminary agreements, final agreements, shovels in the ground, and a lot of that's already happening, right? Because of the ITC and the fact that these companies see the value of locating here, be closer to their customers. We've got a great workforce. We're focusing on building more of it. Yeah, it's not a sprint. I don't know if it's a marathon or it's probably a marathon. Yeah.
This has been a great conversation all of us are having here, and I think I've learned a few new things, that the depth and actually the breadth of the program, because obviously this is not one and done. We're talking about how long this is going to last. I mean, do we have a duration for the CHIPS Act? That how long are you going to work with awardees? Do you have any idea?
Well, in some cases, when there are multiple projects in an award, they can go up towards the end of the decade, so 2030.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, and the NSTC and some of the R&D programs, which I think maybe for the next podcast, you guys will want to delve into that a bit more. Those are really looked to set up things like NSTC and NAPMP, the packaging, that are going to continue on, right? So that's just to touch on your question about how long this is going to be. Those are really geared to last for decades.
Excellent. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I'm really thrilled that I got to know you guys. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you so much, man. Thanks, Mike.
Nice to meet you all.